Hello, my name is Colette Phillips, and I am President CEO of Colette Phillips Communications, which is a strategic communications and DE&I consulting agency, and the founder of Get Connected, which is a cross-cultural business networking event.
Thanks, Colette.
I'm Laura Williams. I'm an internist by training. I'm Chief Medical Officer at Ardelyx. Did my subspecialty training in infectious diseases and have been working in drug development for the last almost 30 years.
I don't know how to top that. My name is Roberto Benson, and I am the Director of Global Clinical Operation at Sarepta Therapeutics. And I've been in the industry for 12 years. Looking for this discussion here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sheila Fasil. I'm the Director of Innovation with our Health Equity Accelerator at Boston Medical Center. I get the pleasure of waking up every day and working with people like Patrina Martin-Cherry and Thea James and others as we're trying to close racial health equity gaps. I have 15 years of experience in healthcare and operations strategy and policy.
Well, thank you all. Yes, round of applause. So let's get straight into it. Sheila, I'm going to start with you if that's all right. Why is this such an important topic for us to be speaking about today? What are we trying to remedy here, ultimately?
Yeah, and if you don't mind, I'm going to start with a personal story and try to be very brief. I was going into treatment with a dermatologist for acne, which I've been struggling with since my youth. And I was given antibiotic, was taking it for 2 weeks, wasn't feeling well. My doctor told me to stop taking it, and then within 24 hours had hives, covered my body. I wasn't able to breathe. I had to be put on steroids. And when I went to my dermatologist, she looked at me with fear in her eyes. It was just like, just keep taking the medication, and wouldn't really tell me what was wrong. Went to my PCP. They were like, well, we think you have lupus. Did you have lupus? And I was like, I've never been diagnosed with lupus. My symptoms were like serum sickness. It took me about 3 months to recover. My body was inflamed. And it was only through my own research that I found case studies that this particular medication had these kinds of effects in people of African descent. But my doctor had prescribed this medication to me. So I know what it's like to be given a medication that was not designed for me in mind. That is why it is important that we have clinical trial diversity, that the drugs and the medical devices and everything that we're creating take into account the genetic diversity of the people that we're serving. And I know that can be a fine line to cross, because we're also trying to push this idea that should be obvious, that we are all part of the human race. We are all, same. But there are also differences that we need to account for, and that's perfectly fine. And part of the work of science is figuring out how we do that. But I've also been in the front lines on the administrative side, having worked at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, which is a research powerhouse, having overseen a department with several million-dollar budget in research. If we are not intentional about recruiting diverse patients and lived experience into our clinical trials, there will continue to be people that have experiences like I do.
Thanks, Sheila, for sharing that. And does that resonate with you guys? Have you heard of that happening?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the key thing when you think about the rationale behind clinical trials, it's to, bring about innovation that helps unmet need. But to do that, at the core of it is safety, right? I mean, we want to make sure that the drugs that we're prescribing are safe and effective. And the only way we can do that is through clinical trials. But those clinical trials have to be diverse. And why is that? Because drugs have different exposures. The way our body handles drugs can be different based on our age, based on our race, ethnicity, based on our gender, based on our genetics, all of those things. And so if we don't look at all of those subpopulations, there is no way of knowing whether or not that safety bar has been reached. I mean, the whole point of it is to really calculate benefit risk, right? is this drug or is this device or is this surgery or therapy, is it more beneficial than the risk? And if we haven't efficiently studied that across a diverse group of patients, then we don't have the answer to that. And equally as important, then those subgroups don't get access to those drugs. And so when you talk about health equity, that's how you address it. You have to make sure that you've done due diligence and studied all of those subpopulations.
Thank you. Roberto, do you want to come in there?
Impacted as well as the data quality. It's important to have major data quality. Being more diverse in your data, in your database, bringing more people in, do visibility across a broader regions or broader countries, make sure you have that diversity included will only help not only the patient population, but the companies to come with better solutions and better effective drugs and devices.
And what have we missed maybe by not getting this right? Like it, I mean, I can see that suddenly.
Mixed, right? I think it's always important for people, for companies in general, to understand what it takes, what are the risks, as we just alluded to. And having that adverse event or severe adverse event in your case it's not acceptable. And we have to be better. And one way we do that is by being broader and be more inclusive.
I would add that not just from the patient and the recruitment perspective, but also the researchers need to be diverse. Because when you have a diverse team, they bring a certain lens to every situation. And if you only have researchers who are representative of one demographic, then you're not going to get the kind of trust when you are recruiting and engaging with diverse populations, because people like to see people who look like them. And it builds trust. That was one of the things that Trina talked about in her presentation. So it's really important to have diversity, not only in the trial set that you recruit, but also among the physicians, among the scientists, among the researchers, so that it can give people who rightfully so have been skeptical of trials, because Black and brown people have had trials happen to them without their permission. And if we want to think about it, think about what happened with the COVID. Lots of Black and brown people did not want to get vaccinated because they're saying, why is it all of a sudden we're getting the first level? You know, so I think building trust is really important, and having a team that reflect the population is also equally important.
I want to ask Sheila, how do you feel in terms of that trust idea, having had your experience as you described?
And Trina touched on this a little bit in her presentation. I'm trying to change how we talk about this, because I think when we use language like communities that are hard to reach, or communities that don't trust us, we end up still shifting the onus to the community to fix the problem. They are not hard to reach. We have made it difficult for them to reach us.
Exactly.
Okay, so I want to ask you a question. How many of you came here via the T? Okay, how many of you drove? How many of you walked? Okay, are there other modes of transportation like bicycles? Yes. Right, okay, if I had told all of you that you had to show up here using the T only as your only form of transportation, how many of you would not have come? Okay, so there you go. Now, are you hard to reach? No. I have made it hard for you to reach me by only providing one means of transportation. So that's why it's important that we change the lens of how we think about this and the language that we use, and that we create omni-channel, multilingual, multicultural access to clinical trials. To a community that, as I was going to call her Sister Colette, because I kind of feel that vibe, who have been experimented on, But now, the age of science that we are in, we were experimented on and then didn't reap the benefits of the experiments.
That's right.
Now we're being excluded and don't reap the benefits of the experiment. So the kinds of conversations that we need to have with communities of color is very different than what we probably think we should be having and what it's going to take to overcome that barrier so that we can become, as an institution, trustworthy.
Yes.
That's right. That's right.
So Colette, or sister,
Brother. Or bro.
yeah. So you've been part of a clinical
Yeah, I've
trial.
been, I call myself a walking guinea pig. Because for like 20 years, because as somebody who have consulted with healthcare, in the healthcare industry for over 2 decades, I know that how important it is to have people, if you're trying something for hypertension, which is something that runs in my family, and you only have white demographic, how are you going to prescribe a medication that I might have a negative reaction to if you don't have people who look like me in the trial? So one of the things that Roberto said when we were sort of prepping for this panel, and I absolutely agreed with him, is the fact that we, as people who have either gone through trials or who are in the healthcare field, people of color, we have a responsibility to also help to educate, to inform, to engage our communities so that they can trust us. And I'll tell you something that happened. Diane Wilkerson actually worked with BMC and with many of the hospitals here during COVID. Now, I'm a former board member of Mass General, so I'm now an honorary board member. And I could have gone to Mass General to get my shot, but she asked me at Jackie Jenkins Scott, would we come to the Reggie Lewis Center, show up, get our shots, and then put it on social media because we are considered to be influencers within our communities. So that, to me, was huge, to be able to put it on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and say, hey, I just got my first shot at the Reggie Lewis Center, come on down and get your shot. And so many people, when I posted it, said, oh, by the way, I already went online and signed up so I can go and get it. So it's really important.
And to you others, have you seen some of these positive examples of it being done well, either within your own companies or externally?
Yeah, I think it's important. Education is key, right? We have to be able to educate others. From a personal perspective, my parents did not want to take the COVID shot either, right? I work in the biotech industry. So it became my responsibility in regards of like sitting down, okay, like what question do you have? Why is it only effective at 94%? Okay, there's gonna be severe adverse events. Places, it's not always gonna be great, but 94% effective is amazing. You don't really get that anywhere else. And then what is the process for the FDA or regulation approval? It's always important to sit down and, okay, here's the step it needs to take. It goes to preclinical, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, depending on a drug or a device, and then here's how long it takes. It's up to us, it's up to me to educate them, and up to us as leaders to educate others around the community. That's how you build that trust. Only comes with education.
Yeah, I would concur. I decided to go into the pharmaceutical industry early on in my career as I was training at University of Washington in the infectious disease space and jointly getting an MPH in public health and epidemiology. It was at the height of the HIV epidemic, and at that time we only had AZT. And I had a patient from the South, and I grew up in Mississippi, so he and I had really good rapport, but he was not doing well, and I had admitted him to hospice. And subsequently, we got one of the new protease inhibitors for compassionate use, and I tried it on him, and he got so much better that they kicked him out of hospice, and I had to help him find an apartment. And for me, that was transformational, and I wanted to know how these types of innovative drugs get to market. And so I spent my first 5 years actually as head of a research unit, and it was phase 1, which is the first phase of human, clinical trials. And it was important, I think, for a number of the patients, when I would go in and, go over the informed consent, explain, right, what was going to take place in the trial, why we were doing the trial, how it was going to help, from a scientific perspective and from a medical perspective. It was really important, I think, as you said, sister. It was really important, for a number of, people of color to actually see someone in my role. There was a trust there. And it's interesting because when I was doing my MPH, it was a resurgence of syphilis along with HIV in Seattle, King County. And so I asked my dad, who, Mississippian, he was educated, and I said, well, if I came back home and I said, I wanted to, go in the community and I wanted to, tell people that, I'm looking to develop a drug for this, what would you think? He said, I would think you'd be somehow trying to, disseminate disease. I'm like, what? And it just speaks to the importance of building trust. That is, there's tons of research out there to say, why we have the issues that we have. And mistrust comes to the top. The second one is sort of lack of knowledge in terms of the clinical trial process, followed by, lack of awareness that there actually are clinical trials. And then finally, there's also sort of this time commitment piece that a lot of folks just aren't able to do. So I think it's, you guys are all spot on. I think, we have a responsibility in whatever role or whatever, sort of seat we share to make sure that we are, helping to move the needle forward as it relates to, clinical trials and the diversity that needs to happen in those clinical trials.
And one other way that you'll find companies are doing that is being involved in the patient community. Whatever disease indication that they're looking at, they want to be involved not only just to give their company exposure, but to make sure they have the ability to explain to the patient population, okay, here's what we're doing, here's what we're thinking, here's how we want to think about it. What are your thoughts? What are your understanding? Do you have any question? Is this doable for you? And when companies do that, it only helps benefit them and help them be more inclusive as well too.
So another personal story. So my grandfather died of Parkinson's in 2016. And it was probably one of the worst things I seen was how bad his body wasted away. It was very hard on my family, particularly on my grandmother. And at the time, like, really what we were doing was just like helping maintain him. Like, there was not really any treatments or things that were given to really, sustain his life or give him a better quality of life. Fast forward 4 years later, I find myself in a director role over a neurology department, overseeing research in clinical operations in movement disorders and Parkinson's. And I was fascinated to see this research team had really unlocked the ability to really recruit a diverse set of patients by doing community engagement.
Yes.
And what they did was they listened to the patients, and in addition to providing education around research and enrolling them in clinical trials, they would offer things like dance classes because patients wanted to continue to move their bodies in a way that brought them joy. So they were really able to tap into that community and offer support groups. And the location where we were offering the clinical trials, I wouldn't put any of you there. Like, that's how bad it was. Like, the ceiling tiles are falling down, the bathrooms like make weird sounds and have noxious fumes coming out of them, and patients still showed up. They came. and participated in clinical trials, some of them many years had been engaged. And I really wish that I had known of that opportunity, of the drugs and the different things that were available, to have given that to my grandfather. But I didn't know. It wasn't in my network. It wasn't in my sphere of knowledge even. And when we talk about how communities learn, I think sometimes we get the sense that like we're doing something different for Black and brown communities than happens in white communities. I guarantee you, white communities aren't downloading research articles and reading it. We're talking to people on the golf course. We are talking to our scientist neighbor next door, right? We're getting that, all communities get information the same way, right? Word of mouth, trusted voices. We're not asking or requiring anything different that's happening in any other community, which is why we have to really start with the community as that source of truth.
Yeah.
I would like to add that you are so spot on. One of the things that people don't think about, and I know that BMC does, is many of in the Black community, and as also in the Latino community, I did not hit the health jackpot because my grandfather is from the Dominican Republic, diabetes and hypertension. So church faith communities, they now have within the churches health committees. And so if you are going to talk about community engagement, partner with the Black churches, with the Latino churches, just like you go on the golf course, go to the churches, because they're trusted venues, trusted people. So you're going to get what I call the halo effect, pun intended, to really get the word out and to educate. It's about information, it's about education, and it's about engagement.
Yes.
So it's IEE, information, education, engagement.
Yeah. I would agree. I mean, you know, it's interesting in terms of everything that's been said. You know, community engagement is absolutely key. And one of the things that Trina said earlier was, you know, you don't have to recreate the wheel. There are a lot of patient advocacy groups that are out there. Partnering with those patient advocacy groups is absolutely key. You know, one of the disease spaces that we work in is kidney failure. And so we partner with local branches of NKF, National Kidney Foundation. We partner with, we actually have a patient advisory group where we brought in patients. And it's not, you know, this isn't just, you know, just trying to make nice. This is actually getting input from patients about, you know, this is a clinical trial that we want to run. What do you think about it? What are the nuances? What are the things in here that makes this difficult for you? And these are dialysis patients, right? And so getting that input ahead of time was absolutely key. And as a result, when you look at, you know, the main trials, clinical trials that we needed to gather data, to present to the FDA, 45% of our patients were Black. 27% were Hispanic.
Wow.
And that wasn't, you know, we were intentional and exhaustive in our efforts, right? I mean, we went to a number of different investigator sites. We got a collection of academicians. We also got community-based physicians. We looked at, you know, research sites around the country that had a diverse database. So it was very intentional. And so for those who, to your point, to say it's difficult, it isn't. The patients exist. They are there. And if we do our jobs in terms of explaining the value, the meaningfulness of all of this, and at the end of it, the potential for health equity, because now they have access to all these drugs or scientific innovations, then you will, you know, the patients will come.
And also telling stories.
Yes.
You know, people want to see people, I call it the SIO.
Oh,
Stories,
another acronym.
impact, outcome. Stories, impact, outcome. you have a story, a featured person, a black person or a Latino person in your information that you're handing out. You tell their story. You talk about the impact of the
Yes.
drug, and then what the outcome was.
Right.
So call it the SIO. Story, impact, and outcome.
Colette, you specialize in this. You probably have got that right for quite a few years. If you were to be going to a trial again, and you think back to some of those early experiences, that you described at the start, what would be different? Like, what would you hope to kind of be seeing or hearing, with an experience today? If we would say we've got this right now, what does that look like?
Well, I think what it looks like is the medication can be used across all cultural and ethnic lines. I don't use the term racial because we don't have different races. We don't have Hispanic race, black race, Asian race. We have one race, but we have multiple ethnicities and cultures based on where people come from. Your makeup, whether you're from the Far East or the Caribbean or Africa. So we have to so that would be what I would think would be different. And also the people who are conducting the studies look like the population that you are creating these trials for.
So how soon is Colette going to be able to see that vision?
I think pretty soon. I think, speaking from like companies in Boston or around the Cambridge area, I think a lot of people are now trying to be more involved in the community, doing more broader perspective when it comes to feasibility, having more countries, more regions involved. I think that's going to be helpful. I think one other thing that they're doing as well too is being more educational, more like focused on the education of the disease, the trial. It is a trial at the end of the day. What's the risk and benefit, right? Whether like you're going to be able to benefit from it. You may not be able to benefit from it yourself, but you help in future generations. So I think that's going to be a key. What some companies are doing and having more patient stipends. I think socioeconomic is a big part of it, and why we have less diversity in clinical trials. But what we do in regards to that is pay for travels, time spent, study visits, or even just daycare or childcare. I think it's a key thing that we're trying to focus on in order to make sure that we have the ability to open trials and clinical trials to more of a diverse population.
Thanks, Roberta. Sheila?
And I'd like to think that we can see that within our lifetimes, because y'all already showed y'all could do it.
Right.
COVID, which came to nearly wipe us out, within a year, we had a vaccine. That is absolutely incredible. And it was everybody, all hands on deck, globally. We decided this virus is not going to take us out. And we came up with a solution, multiple solutions. So we know that we can do it if we have the right focus and resources and determination. So it is very possible.
Excellent. Well, I think we've got a minute for questions. I'm looking at Emily very nervously. So please just raise your hand and I'll turn to you. Yes, sir.
If the panel could address this, what is the connection between, or I suppose is there, and what do you see it as, between the DEI strategies we talk about, hiring, promotion, professional development, and then things like supplier diversity and everything else you can think of? What between those programs and the results on the clinical trials? Is there a connection between the two, or are they just, the clinical trials can be made diverse even if the company is sort of doing only an okay so-so job on the other stuff? Is it really, we love to say it's all connected and one will drive better outcomes on the other. Is it, and where does it show up?
Well, I think it's all about, again, building trust. DE&I should be an integral part of everything that a company does. It should be like breathing. It should be an integral part of everything that you do, from philanthropy to recruiting, pipeline, advancing, you should have DE&I. And when people know that a company is committed, they want to be more enthusiastic about participating in activities that a company. I love Eastern Bank, and that's not just because Natalia is here, because they walk the talk. They're the bank with which I do business, because I want to do business with an organization that reflect my values and who have people on their board, in their management team who look like me. So it's the same thing. People bank, but do you have to bank because, yes, you want to bank. It's tied into, again, coming to the table and making it one of your core values. I keep saying to people, this whole craziness that's going on about wokeness, this is not about political correctness.
Right.
Look around this room. This is what diversity looks like. The world is diverse. You have 1 billion plus people in China, 1 billion plus people in India, Africa, Latin America. The world is diverse. And if you are in a global company and you are not thinking and bringing an inclusive lens, it's not about replacing white men. We need white male allies. We need everybody at the table. So coming to the table with an inclusive lens is what's going to be the secret sauce and the win for every company.
If I
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah. Clap that. Let's go down the line. Sheila.
So how it's connected, I'll throw an analogy your way. So the teams that are doing the research decide the question.
That's right.
And when the questions are coming from your interests and your lived experience. So if the teams don't represent the interests and lived experiences of multiple people, the questions are only going to reflect what a subset of the population is curious about, right? So that is one reason why your teams need to be diverse, because they're going to drive the questions that we're asking and how we're going to. So that is the engine, right? The community is going to guide you to what direction are we going, what matters, right? That's the steering wheel. Your supplier diversity and your investments in your community and economic mobility, that's the paved road, right, that we're driving on. That's going to ensure that everyone has access to the innovations that these very diverse teams are driving, solving the solutions that our global community cares about. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's how I see the connection.
Thanks, Sheila. Roberto.
I don't know how to top that experience. But I think once you have a company that's focused on DEI internally, it reflects across the board, right? So then there will be more a focus on how are our trials diverse? Like, what population are we hitting? Should we broaden our feasibility, as I keep saying that, but should we do more research elsewhere, globally or centrally? Help you understand the disease itself. The landscape is really important. So I think it starts within, then it expands externally.
Yeah, and I think if, the other connection for me, and I think for our company, is patient advocacy.
Yes.
They go hand in hand with DEI, right? I mean, if you know that the reason you are coming together is because the patients are waiting. There is a patient on the other side of what you're doing. And anybody you engage in internally has to have that same sort of belief and goal in mind. Like, I don't care if you sit on the commercial side, I don't care if you sit on the regulatory side, I don't care if you sit on the marketing side, I don't care if you sit, on medical affairs, or you're the one doing the clinical trials yourself. It doesn't matter. What matters is that the patients are waiting. We saw that with the COVID, pandemic, and thank goodness a lot of the work had been done already. I mean, we had spent 10 years working on these viruses beforehand. We didn't start from scratch. And so I think at the end of the day, if your mindset is such that the patient is waiting, then everything you do is going to be centered around that. I mean, having a patient advisory board so that your questions aren't just your interests, but they reflect the interests of the patients. And it's a diverse group of patients. I mean, the patients that sit on our advisory board, whether it's in the kidney space or the GI space, are a very diverse group of patients. And they help us a lot. And I think what else helps us is that when we get done, when we actually collect that data, we go back to them and we share what we found. And they get it, and they see why that's useful. And then the process continues, right? Because you have started to build that kind of trust. So yes, it definitely matters, not just internally, but what you do internally permeates externally.
Thank you. The patient is waiting. I hear that. The patient is waiting. I'm going to go to this side. If you just wait for the microphone. I was too hasty last time. Thank you for your question, by the way.
Hi, Donna Remen from the Ellie Fund. And my question is about exclusions to clinical trials that often eliminate Black, brown patients from being eligible for trials, even if they do have the education about the trial or the childcare, transportation, meals on the table that they would need to access the trials.
Who wants to start with that one?
I think I can start with that. I think it's focus on the company, right? So it's the company's role to understand the disease space that they're in. What is the patient population? I think as a company, when they look at the patient itself, right, the patient on waiting, as we just alluded to, they don't look at Black, brown, white, or anything. They say the patient's on waiting. We need to get the best drug in the market for the patient. So having a company need to understand the patient landscape, what the disease is, what regions are impacted by the disease and the patient population themselves, and then that will help them to broaden their aspect when it comes down to the inclusion-exclusion criteria. Then it's also understanding the PPAC, which is the patient advisory boards, having those communications, having those open communications with back and forth, designing your protocol, what are the schedule of assessments looking like, what's more feasible, how often can you get to the site, and that will help them facilitate diversity within their trial.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's important again is that at the utmost, of importance in any of these clinical trials is safety. So we have a list of inclusion and exclusion criteria. The exclusion criteria are generally there from a safety perspective, and they are also, part of discussions that happen with the FDA. Like we don't just write a protocol and then start a clinical trial. We actually have to get, approval from ethics committees, from the FDA, from all of those sources. And so I think, again, by including patients in that conversation, we've been able to, I think, over the years, successfully sort of decrease those number of exclusion criteria and actually, look at whatever the disease state is in a more sort of transparent and efficient way. And we have to continue, right, to do better with that. But the genesis of those exclusion criteria is really safety. And so what I do is, I look at those, and you have to ask yourself with each one of those, both inclusion and exclusion criteria, how does this impact not only enrollment, but most importantly, safety?
Thanks, Laura. Sheila, do you want to come in on that?
I do have something to say. So yes, but you're absolutely right. Yes, these exclusion criteria were really coming from a point of safety, right? Like you shouldn't be experimenting on pregnant persons or people who are incarcerated and other things. But one of the points I made earlier is that I think the pendulum has shifted in science that the harm was being experimented on. The harm now is being excluded. So your institutions and policies that interrogate the design of your protocols need to be more rigorous in questioning why certain groups of people are being excluded. and really changing that narrative and changing the lens of how we think about it. We should always have safety in mind and also be willing to invest in making sure that people feel safe and are safe in the way that they participate in clinical trials. But I think it's really going to be institutions changing their mindset around this and really being more thoughtful about why we're excluding people.
Thank you. We've run out of time. Can we give a round of applause to this amazing panel? That was a real pleasure for me to be able to sit here and hear all of your thoughts and ideas for us and calls to action, really. And thank you, to the questions. And I'm definitely going to leave today, with that. The patient is waiting in my mind. That definitely landed for me. So thank you all. And I'm going to now run over to the podium to introduce our fantastic next speaker. But one more round of applause for these guys.
Thank you.